Hey everyone, welcome to a new video, welcome to my channel. My name is Maaike and today I have a guide to historical fiction for you. This has been requested. Some people have been leaving comments on some of my bookish content asking me about historical fiction and where to start, so I decided to devote a video to this. I've done a similar video a couple of years ago talking about Gothic fiction, which is one of my other favorite genres, types of books you could say. So I will leave that linked in the eye above so you can have a look at that if you'd like to. And in this video, I would like to talk about some of the historical fiction that I like versus some of the historical fiction that I don't like, because I definitely don't like all historical fiction, and I have a very particular type of historical fiction that I love. And that, first of all, setting. Of course, you could pick any moment in history and set a book in that setting. However, I am very much inclined to loving anything set in Victorian time London. Like London in the Victorian era, especially the second half of the 19th century, I'm down. And that is also my first recommendation to you. If you want to start reading historical fiction, find books that are set in a historical time period that you enjoy. So for instance, if you really like ancient Egypt, then find books that are set in ancient Egypt, that sort of thing. If you don't like history, then maybe it's a little bit more difficult to get into historical fiction. And what makes or breaks an historical fiction novel for me very often is the way the setting actually plays out. Especially if you already know something about that era, it can be very annoying if if the author has ignored certain important aspects of the era, and then a book can actually fall through a little bit, I find. But yeah, when it comes to historical fiction, I have a very particular type that I enjoy. So let's just start there. So if I hold up this stack of books, then these are all books that I've read, that I've completed. And at the heart of every single one of these books is a particular mystery that has to be solved, either by a detective, by a police officer, or by someone who sort of tries to figure that out. Some of these have fantastical elements, some of them do not. Some of these are written by actual historians, some of them are not. So there's a very big mixture of things here, but what they all have in common is the fact that they all have a mystery, a puzzle, if you like, that needs to be solved. So let's just get through these very quickly one by one. At the top here is a YA novel, and this is The Shallow Graves by Jennifer Donnelly. This is about a young girl. She's a very wealthy girl, and she figures out that things are happening in the city that shouldn't be happening, and through circumstances she enlists the help of a journalist who's trying to get ahead in life, to try and solve it. And it ends up that her dad is being involved in some way, and it's very mysterious, and it was a really, really good read. It was very well written, especially if you want to get into historical fiction and you don't want it to be too difficult, then starting with something YA could be a nice one. So the next book I'd like to mention is this. This is The Watchmaker of Filigree Street by Natasha Puli. This book was one that just drew me in because of the cover. Let's just be honest. I love a good cover, and a lot of historical fiction comes with pretty covers. So that's usually one thing. The setting, it's there, 19th century London, and this is about a guy who finds a mysterious watch on his pillow, and when he finds that watch also saves his life, and then he wants to know who made it. In the end, I found that how everything played out was a bit sort of like it petered out more so than that the story actually resolved things, which is why I just felt that a lot of the storytelling in this didn't really lead anywhere. There were a lot of loose ends that could have been resolved, so I felt that in the end the book was a little bit lacking, but it was very entertaining and I very much enjoyed myself while reading this. Two books by the same author. This is by Matthew Plempin. This is his first book, The Street Philosopher, and this is his second book, The Devil's Acre. The Street Philosopher is set in Manchester in 19th century England, and I believe this is about like a heist, like art that's gone missing after the Crimean War, and somehow that ended up in Manchester, and the street philosopher of the title is a journalist who then works together with a bit of a wacky, I think he's a police officer, and they sort of have this sort of like Sherlock and Watson kind of banter going on. I love that when that happens. You will see that coming back up in a moment or two. And this is just a very enjoyable book. It is a bit of a bigger read. and definitely one that if you don't know much about the backdrop of the Crimean War, this may be a little bit more difficult to understand, but it is a good one, and Matthew Plempin is also a historian, so you know this is well researched and that all of the facts line up. His second book is The Devil's Acre, and this is a good concept, but I think it was trying to do a little bit too much. I find the first one a little bit better than this. This is set in London, and this is about a gun factory by Samuel Colt's factory having a branch in London, and the Devil's Acre refers to a part of London that was at the time just a no-go zone for everyone, and I believe the factory is like on the edge, and that's sort of what it revolves around. But the main character is Samuel Colt, and I find some historical fiction to be quite problematic if there are actual historical characters in the story. So I prefer it if the characters aren't real, because else you can like start Googling them and like what they were actually like and what they contributed to the world, etc., etc. So this was still very enjoyable. I just felt it was missing that touch. In a very similar vein is this book by Gaslight by Stephen Price. This is a big chunky one, and it took a while to read it. This is set again in London in the 19th century. The main character you're following here is William Pinkerton. If you're unfamiliar with the name, the Pinkerton Agency was one of the first private detective agencies in the world, and he was the founder of that. And there's again some sort of mystery going on that he's trying to resolve, and then there's London politics, and he's like the American outsider who's not really part of what's going on, and he's trying to introduce forensics and all of these like traditional people don't believe in it and all that. It's a bit more of a slow-paced read, which you will find with some historical fiction. In terms of setting, this was excellent though. One thing that I love about 19th century London settings is the fog, the mystery, just that setting, and it was actually there at the time. London was congested from all of the factories that were around, so there was this like eternal fog in the city. So that is one thing that I know is for sure, and that just adds to this super dark, mysterious atmosphere, and that's what this book does very well. And then we move on to series, and these are two of my favorite book series as well. This is The Strings of Murder by Oscar de Muriel, and this has Frey Emma Gray as its main character, so I've been calling it the Frey Emma Gray series now. It has 4 books out, and this is set mainly in 19th century Scotland. It starts as off in London, but then Ian Frey needs to travel up north to continue his job as a police officer working in the supernatural department together with Nine Nails McGray, who, after his sister hacked off one of his fingers in a bout of craziness, is convinced that things like the devil and all things supernatural exist. And just to humor him, they've given him his own section in the police department, and Frey is going to work for him. And what this author does very well is that he uses some of the scientific revelations of the time and works that into the mystery of the plot. So very enjoyable, very clever books. If you like Sherlock Holmes, Watson kind of stuff, then you'll like this. Last but not least, The Yard by Alex Grecian. This is a series that kind of petered out towards the end. I haven't been able to find the 5th book anywhere, but it seems to be out. I've only read the first 4, and the thing that went wrong with this series is because it tried to put in Jack the Ripper. Anyways, this is about 19th century London police constables working at the H Division, so newly established police department in the East End of London, and they start solving crimes. One thing, of course, that happened is Jack the Ripper, and in these novels, he comes back. And that is one of the things I didn't like very much. I like the 3 standalones that don't have a focus on Jack the Ripper a lot more. There's one book that really talks about Jack the Ripper a lot, and it's just a lot of speculation, and I don't really like that. But the other 3 are really nice. Within the category of historical fiction, I think there's also a particular type of historical fiction novel where the backdrop is very much just the historical setting, and it's just used to tell a new story within that setting. And I have a couple of books that I feel fit that category. That's all of these books, and some of these books are more successful than others at doing their job, I would say. The first book that I have here is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. In the US, this book has been marketed as YA. In Europe, this has not been marketed as such. It has been marketed as a historical fiction novel. told from the perspective of death. This story tells the tale of a little girl in Germany, in a town, trying to survive through the Second World War. So the Second World War is very much used as a backdrop, and of course she lives through the war, so she does get all of this propaganda and like the situation. She definitely knows what's going on, but she's also just trying to be a kid, trying to live through a war, and wrong and right isn't necessarily part of her being just yet, but as she grows up, she becomes more aware of the things that are going on around her. So this is a very good book, very sad. Not the quickest read, it's a bit more slow paced, I feel, but it is a good one. So with the same setting as Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See, this also has the backdrop of the Second World War, and it tells the tale on the one hand of a blind girl who has to flee Paris together with her dad to the seaside to avoid the war in Paris. And there is the storyline of a German boy who is raised by the Hitlerjugend to become a radio communication specialist. And somehow these two storylines end up coming together. So we get two different perspectives. And as time progresses, their stories are starting to join together. That's all I'm going to say about this. I read this in a day. It was exquisitely well written. It's very sort of lyrical, and I very, very much enjoyed it. It's just a really, really pretty story. Sometimes you can, of course, also play around with historical settings, and that's what this book does. This is The Little Book by Selden Edwards. It's been a while since I read it, but it's an absolutely great read. Again, quite big and bulky, and not the quickest read. But the premise of this is about a guy, he dies, and instead of going to heaven, as he expects, he wakes up and is suddenly chucked into turn-of-the-century Vienna. And he's like, what's going on? He's wearing regular 1980s street clothes, and he is trying to figure things out. On the way, he meets his dad, he meets his old school teacher, and he pretty much meets every single important philosopher of the early 20th century. It's hilarious, but it also has a really cool sort of setting that it uses. And then there's a time-traveling element. A book that's more, I would say, gothic fiction than anything else, but it is set in a different era than when it was written. This was written in the 1930s, but it's set in early 18th century Cornwall, is Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. I just read this year. It's a very dark, mysterious novel, and I just really like the setting. The historical aspect of it didn't really matter all that much, I would say. It's not what drives the plot forward, so it's definitely more of like a backdrop, I'd say, than anything else, but it's a really, really good one. I've sort of almost gone through this like in like a gradation, how important the setting is. In this book, it's actually a book series, the Invisible Library series by Genevieve Cogman. Each book has a different historical setting, it seems. This one has 19th century London, another one has 16th century Venice, there's one set in 1920s America. All of these things are going on, but this is most definitely a fantasy series. It has steampunk, it has, again, traveling through alternate universes. It's definitely a fantasy novel with dragons, fairies, all that jazz, but each story is set in a different historical setting, which makes it historical fiction at the same time to me. Very enjoyable. These are very entertaining, quick reads. If I want to get out of a reading slump, I read one of these. And last but not least, I have this YA story for you. This is Tangled Webs by Lee Bross, and as you can see, I was very much taken in by the cover. And this one, it kind of only still lives on my shelves because of that cover. If it didn't have this cover, I would have decluttered it. This is a book that tries to use sort of like an Oliver Twist kind of take in like 18th century London. Doesn't really work. It's a little too easy, a little too, yeah. Sometimes the historical setting can also just be used in a bad way, and I feel that that's the case here. And then the last category, last but not least, are historical fiction books, where I feel that the setting and sort of the politics of that world are very much highlighted to tell the story. These are the kind of books where you really are, where the aim almost seems to be like you're living in that period, if you would like to go. And this is possibly the most problematic kind of historical fiction novel, because out of the three that I'm holding here, only one of them I truly enjoyed. And I'm not sure why. Let's just start with the one that I enjoyed and tell you why I enjoyed it. This is Belgravia by Julian. This is about a family that's trying to sort of grow in a status and richness and tries to become part of the traditional elite class of London society at the beginning of the 19th century, and you sort of follow their journey, and there's a bit of intrigue and a scandal, and they're trying to sort of navigate the waters, and then everybody they meet and how everybody is involved with that. This was very fun, very entertaining. I like the scheming and all of the politics going on behind closed doors that was described in this novel. This is very well written, very enjoyable read indeed. And that's why this is my favorite out of the three. These two books were a bit more problematic for me. The Miniaturist by Burton was one of my first reads of 2018, and I just kind of felt like this book wasn't going anywhere. It promised you a mystery, but you don't get one, and that to me just made this book not stand out. It's set in 17th century Amsterdam. I'm Dutch. 17th century Amsterdam is pretty much our national history. We get that at school from like the age of 8. And I felt that this is probably very believable if you're not Dutch, I think. But for me, Amsterdam, 17th century Amsterdam didn't really come to life. And it also kind of, I think it took too many liberties, you could say. So that's what irked me in the end as well. This book is The Essex Serpent by Sara. Very stunning cover. Again, that's what I fell for. And this was a bit similar for me like The Miniaturist. I think, however, that in terms of setting and the historical setting of this book, that was very well done. So I have to say that I really enjoyed that part of this story, but it had a romance at its center that it didn't say much about in the blurb, because again, this is presented as a mystery while it is not. Same for this. This is much more of a romance, and this one is too. And it's not that I don't like reading about romance, but it's just if that becomes the sole thing that the story is about, I usually become a little bit ugh. And I think that that's also why historical fiction has a bit of a bad rep, because some historical fiction or historical settings, it's just like swooning ladies in big ball gowns and you know, it's that. And that to me is not my favorite kind of historical fiction. I mean, I've just talked to you about what I do like. I like mystery, I like intrigue, I like a bit of murder, and I like the politics surrounding that, but don't just make it about two people falling in love. Ugh. So we'll end on that note. These are the kind of historical fiction novels that I like to read. Let me know in a comment down below what kind of historical fiction you like to read. And just know that historical fiction isn't just one particular type. I think that historical fiction comes with different genres inside it. Just like literary fiction, just like other genres. You know, not every single fantasy novel is necessarily just the same as well. So within that subgenre, there are just so many sub-elements to it that can categorize books into different areas. I like myself a historical setting, murder mystery. That's what I prefer. So let me know in a comment down below what you really enjoy reading in terms of historical fiction. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I would very much like for you to come back sometime as well. So if you'd like to see more videos by me, then please subscribe by clicking the red button down below. And that means that we've come to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!